Welcome this evening, Monday, the 8th of June, to Team Swain's Town Hall. The title of tonight's Town Hall is a conversation with Mr. Clarence Henderson. We appreciate all of you for attending. This is a special event, and we're really looking forward to being able to talk with Clarence and get to know him a little better and hear his stories and his heroics as he was a young man. A little bit about Clarence. In 1960, on the second day of the Greensboro sit-in, Joseph A. McNeil and Franklin McCain were joined by William Smith and Mr. Clarence Henderson at the Woolworth's lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina. Clarence was in the forefront of the civil rights battle as he bravely stepped up to participate in the sit-in at the Woolworth's diner. Today, Clarence is a champion for freedom and conservative values. His message will inspire you and teach you how to change the narrative in the nation from liberty for a few to liberty for all. In 2000, Clarence was the recipient of the 40th anniversary Sit-In Participant Award, and in 2013, he was appointed by Governor Pat McCrory to the chairman's seat on the North Carolina Martin Luther King Commission. In addition, Governor McCrory conferred in 2016 the Order of the Longleaf Pine Award to Clarence with the rank of Ambassador Extraordinary. As of May 2017, Mr. Henderson was appointed president of the Frederick Douglass Foundation for the state of North Carolina. Mr. Henderson's energetic involvement in the church as head elder, new members, coordinator, Sunday school teacher, and finance committee member, in his life's journey as a teacher, college administrator, entrepreneur, and motivational speaker have given him a unique perspective on what confronts society today. While his life is chronicled with episodes of civil unrest in which he found himself thrust into the midst of, he did his part to bring awareness and change in a peaceful manner. Clarence now champions a new cause for a better America by challenging, motivating, and inspiring others to be aware and responsible for the world that surrounds them. Clarence, we're very happy to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Alan, I am delighted to be here this evening to share some information that hopefully will give the audience perhaps a different insight on America, who I am, and why I am so optimistic about America and where we can go from here. And it's going to take all of us to make sure that we continue to defend the freedom that was founded by the Declaration of Independence and continue to make America the greatest country we can make it.
Okay, Clarence, I appreciate that. We have a few questions that were sent to us in advance, and we'll probably get some others as we go through this town hall. Can you tell us a little bit about your family, your father, your mother, siblings you had?
Okay, originally my family was from a little place called Townville, South Carolina. I was born on a farm. Do not have a birth certificate because I was delivered by a midwife. During this time, my father was a sharecropper. And oddly enough, the guy that he worked for, he and the guy became best friends. And he named me after this guy who was white. And it helped set the tone for me to help bridge the gap between the races. I truly believe in divine intervention, and my life was set before me as soon as I was born. I have, there were five of us children. I'm the youngest. Two of the children died before I was born, and so when we came to Greensboro, North Carolina, it was five of us: my father, my mother, and my two brothers. And my father was an amazing man, even though I did not really recognize it and appreciate it until later on in life. And the first thing I'll tell you that made him amazing was that I saw him go from a tenant farmer, and when he came to Greensboro, North Carolina, he never worked for anybody but himself. And he only had a third grade education, but he was a brilliant mechanic. Before they had the bells and whistles on the cars and all these kind of things they have on there and the technology, if he heard it run, he could repair it. And he was so efficient in what he did is that my mother never worked anything but a part-time job. And my dad, with third grade education, was able to provide for himself and his family all the way up until the children became grown. So we moved to Greensboro, North Carolina, and we moved into a segregated neighborhood. And during that time, I went to a neighborhood school. But I think it was about the third year that we got and moved to Greensboro. My dad moved us, and for those of you who are familiar with UNCG in Greensboro, at that time it was Women's College. We moved right into that area on a little street called Oakland Avenue. So I moved from the segregated neighborhood into what the society would call today an integrated neighborhood, in that there were 4 houses sitting back in a little cul-de-sac, dirt road, where Black families lived, and we were surrounded by white families. So even though we had moved to this neighborhood, I was bused out of that neighborhood over back in the neighborhood where I lived initially to attend school, because, as I said, we were doing it at a time of segregation. And so even though I passed by all these schools that white kids attended, I went back to the Black school, and I never attended an integrated school. And so I would play with the Black kids, my friends, during lunchtime. When I got home, I would play with the white kids that were in the area, because it was just one other Black kid that was my age. And so I learned then that racism is not something you're born with. It's something that is inbred or you're taught, because we never had any disagreements, we never had any arguments, but it was the adults. And during this time, my mother used to take me downtown to a store called F.W. Woolworths. And to set the scene for you as far as the F.W. Woolworths was concerned was that basically everything in there was the same except for a few places. For example, when you went downstairs, you had 2 bathrooms, one saying colored and one saying white. You had 2 water fountains, one saying colored, one saying white. And they should look at the water coming out of both of those fountains and wonder what the difference was, because they looked the same. But when you went upstairs, everything was the same except for a few things there. And they had a lunch counter where you could partake of a meal. The difference between me as a member of the Black race partaking of a meal and the people that were the white, they could sit at the lunch counter and eat. And if I wanted to get food, I had to go to the back of the counter and order my food and take it to go. During that time, I lived in an era time known as Jim Crow, which is far different from today's time. It was separate but equal. But my question, as I reflected back on it, is if we're equal, then why should we need to be separate? And so I continued to see those things as I was growing up. And I hear people today talking about racism, and I say to them, you should have been with me back during that time, because I went through a number of things, and what they did is they made me stronger. So as I continued through life, and I started at North Carolina A&T State University in 1959, on February 2nd, 1960, I was sitting in the break room at Bluford Library, the lounge, when a friend of mine by the name of Ezel Blair came down and told me what they had done on February 1st and asked me if I wanted to join, and I told him I did. And he told me, says, we had set the lunch counter the day before, and we're going back and sit again. He said, now, if they serve us, I'll pay for the meal, because I didn't have any money. Well, needless to say, Ezel owes me a lunch because I never ate at that counter. So we left from A&T's campus and started to walk downtown. And as we got to the front doors of the of Woolworths, a realization hit me. It wasn't fear, but it was a certain realization about how precious life really is. If you can imagine walking into a place and not knowing how you're going to come out, whether or not you're going to be in a vertical position, going to jail, or a prone position, going to the hospital or to the morgue. It changed my whole outlook on life. And so when I hear the statement about defining moments, we all have defining moments. Those moments that they're not unusual, but what we do with those moments, that's what defines us. And so I sat at that lunch counter, and we took the people totally by surprise. And it was 176 days of putting Jim Crow on trial. We had a bomb threat. We had the KKK come in. At one point in time, we had some 500 people in that one particular place. And there were many discussions as to how they would, if they would integrate the counter or not. The real thing that caused the counter to be integrated was economics, because people like Dr. Willoughby Player, who was then the president for Bennett College, she shopped at a store across the street. One place she shopped was a place called Ellis Stone. And she went in there and said to them, she cut up her credit card and said that if you don't open up the lunch counter, then I'm no longer going to shop there. And so that began to change it. But sitting at that counter, I never had any idea what was going to transpire that did transpire. It was a shot that was heard around the world when these 4 students walked in and sat down at the lunch counter and sat down, and it should not have been anything unusual, except that these 4 students were Black. And they sat down with a written code of law known as Jim Crow forbade them to do so. So we actually stepped over into the fiery furnace. We actually walked in the lion's den to begin to change history and cross the color line. And I reflected again in my life, and one of the things I thought about, and you may have seen the movie called Braveheart, where it says every man dies and not every man lives. And so it was a people that said they were sick and tired of being devalued and thought less of. And we decided that it was the right time to do that, and that's what we did. And it changed my life completely. But it was 40 years before I was recognized for having participated in it. And I won't go into all the reasons for that. Actually, the picture that you see of the 4 students sitting at the lunch counter, which on the 4 students on the right-hand side, they had the wrong names down there because they had the 4 guys that were there on the first day, of which 2 were there on the second day sitting down. The other 2 were still there. And so for 40 years, I was not recognized for having participated. And it upset some of my family members, but it didn't upset me because I knew I was there, and I didn't sit the counter for any kind of recognition. It was because it was something that I felt like I should do based upon what I'd seen throughout my life. And I'll give you one example of that. When I lived over on Oakland Avenue near what is now UNCG, I'm riding my bicycle down the street. And I'm on the right-hand side as far away as I can be on the sidewalk. And this white man is approaching me. He looks straight ahead. He never looks at me. And I'm sure he saw me in his peripheral vision. And he starts to drift over closer and closer to me. And he actually knocks me off my bicycle and never even acknowledges that I'm there. It was like I was an invisible person. Those are the kinds of things that have driven me and have helped me to see things differently, because not only have I lived in North Carolina, I've lived in Maryland, New York, Alabama when I was in the military, Georgia, So I've been all over places, quote unquote, where I've seen racism. And so racism is not anything new to me. It is a certain way you have to deal with it at this particular point in time. And so again, I hope the parts of this story that I have shared with you will help some of the people that are listening to help them understand why I see the way I see it and why I think the way I think.
Yeah, that's amazing. I didn't realize the level of detail, and thank you for going into that for us. Because your story is our story, and we're compelled to ask these questions in this time. Now, what were the repercussions when you protested? What did the law do? What happened to you immediately after the sit-in?
Well, during the time that we were sitting in, some of the students got arrested. Uh, One particular gentleman that stayed in Greensboro was basically blackballed by a guy by the name of David Richmond, and it changed his life forever. But what I did is that I decided that I dropped out of school after the first year. And I worked a few years because the reason I dropped out is because my parents could not afford for me to continue school because I stayed off of campus and because my parents couldn't afford for me to live on campus. And so after working for a couple of years, I moved to New York and said I was never coming back again. But never say never, because after living what I thought was a good life in New York, because I managed a shoe store on 125th Street when I was in New York, and actually met Robert Kennedy when he was running for president. Met people like Muhammad Ali, Jackie Robinson, James Brown. Met a lot of people. Wilt Chamberlain, who played basketball. And then, during that time, they had what you call the draft. And so after being there for approximately 6 years, Uncle Sam sent a letter to my parents' house, and they said that I didn't live there, which I didn't, but Uncle Sam has a way of finding you. So about 2 weeks, a month or so, I got a letter saying that Uncle Sam wants you. And it took me down, I went down to Whitehall Street in Brooklyn, I think it was Whitehall Street, and there were 3 guys there that were from Greensboro, but I was the only one that they accepted. So I went from, you're talking about a culture shock, I went from Harlem, New York, and they put me on a twin-engine plane, then asked me how I wanted to go, and sent me to Fort Jackson, South Carolina for my basic training. Well, Uncle Sam wasn't through with me yet. From there, he sent me to Fort Gordon, Georgia. He still wasn't finished with me. From there, he sent me to Fort Rucker, Alabama, where I spent 16 months at Fort Rucker, Alabama, when George Wallace was the governor there. And I guess you know what that means. Quite a story, and I was glad to get out of there. But I've been back there twice since then. Went to the 16th Street Church there and saw where those young girls got killed. Met one of a guy who was there in the church during that time, and we did a march down there. And the march was basically about all lives matter. And we had some 20,000 people marching from that church to the arena where we were going to have the event. And that event, the only paper it made was the Alabama paper. And so I liken myself to be the unknown freedom fighter that has been involved in a lot of things by the grace of God. And every time I've tried to go away from it, God has called me back, because I didn't say before, when I lived in Harlem, I was there when one of the riots broke out in Harlem. After I got in the military, I went back to A&T and got my degree, but I went back in 69. And what happened in 69 is that they had the riots break out there. Here I am right in the middle of this thing again. And I'm a member of the Veterans Club, and we worked diligently to try to have the riot cease, because Governor Scott has said if the riot doesn't cease, then I bring tanks in, I'll level A&T State University during that time at A&T College. And so I've seen these kind of things happen from north to south, from south to north, and I'm well able to discuss with people about these kind of situations when they occur and what one should do during that time. So the results of me after the sit-in were not perhaps as dramatic as with other people because I left here and I stayed away from until 1968.
I tell you, that's amazing. As a as a retired veteran, I'd like to thank you for your service. I think you were sent to Fort Rucker in Alabama for a reason. I think some people would say wherever he went, trouble followed. No, you were there. You were sent there to use your peaceful means of protesting to make a difference and make a statement, but yet not let it get out of hand.
Right.
In fact, I read an article where Dr. Martin Luther King not only followed the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi, a lot of his peaceful protest policies and how he lived his life was based on what you four young men did at that Woolworth's counter in 1960. So I thank you for that, because while you may not have gotten credit for 40 years, you were part of that impetus that made a difference to help change our nation. So I thank you for that. Okay. Now, when you were at A&T the first time, and before you quit that freshman year or finish your freshman year because of funding, what was the reaction of the student body and the professors for having what you guys did at Woolworth? What was the reaction?
You know, we had decided that it would be a peaceful movement, that we were going to showcase what was happening to the Black community especially across the southern part of the United States. One of the incidents that happened, and show you how I think this thing was guided by divine intervention, was that the powers that be went to A&T to then we had a president, now they call them chancellors. And they said to him, we want you to expel the students that continue to sit at the lunch counter. And he very wisely said this. He said, as long as they are attending their classes, as long as they're not causing disturbance, what they do on their own time is up to them. And so what happened during that time is that it cost Woolworth somewhere around $200,000 during that 176 days, which would be equivalent to probably $1.5 million or $2 million during the day's dollars. So that's actually what changed it and made things different. But we all came together for the same cause, and that was to integrate the lunch counter. That was our focus. That's what we intended to do. And we picked Woolworths because they were a chain store, and we were hopeful they would catch on all around the southeastern part of the United States, and actually went so far as New York, even though they were integrated there, but they protested by sitting down just as we did. So we actually sat down to stand up for freedom. And you have to understand that freedom has to always be defended, because you're never actually standing still. If we don't continue to defend freedom in America, we will move back to King George III and go back to where we were as a country before. And that's what I'm apprehensive about, is that we don't lose, especially our individual freedom.
That's great. That's great. And I guess wherever that president is, that was the president when you were a freshman, I would like to applaud his courage and his determination to see that this was a higher calling, and that he displayed the courage to allow you students to stay there based on what you were doing as a peaceful movement. Now let's talk about how it was at the home front that freshman year after you did the sit-in. What did your parents say to you after that? What did your mother say? That's probably even
well, my mother was very concerned about her. It was three of us, 3 boys, and she was very concerned about what might happen to us. But she remained very quiet during that time. As a matter of fact, The only way that they knew it happened was that my father took the newspaper and they saw it on, I think it was on February 3rd, is when they saw the picture in the paper. And my father was a quiet man that moved very well between the races. And so I think he had an understanding of what I had actually done during that time. But there were, my oldest brother was a policeman in Greensboro. He spent 19 years in the police department and dotted every I and crossed every T. So I have a great respect for the police department. In any profession you look at, you got the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the only way you can identify them is by the action that they take. And also, my middle brother was in the Navy, and he traveled around various countries. And he used to tell me about some of the things that he saw, which really made me understand how great America is, because he would talk about some countries he'd been in where he'd see a guy with his hand cut off or his leg cut off, and that was what they did because he committed some crime or stealing something. So we are a nation of laws, and we should be very appreciative of America, even though it's an imperfect country. But for me, it's the greatest country in the world. My father also, I should see car dealerships bring cars to him that their people couldn't repair, and they had a piece of paper on the wall because he just knew what he was doing when it came to car. I should see him. I've seen him take a mold and break it down and put it back together. But most of our resources are over in the graveyard because I don't know anything about mechanics, because all I saw was the dirt under my father's fingernails. I didn't see this great gift that he had, and it could have saved me a lot of money because, as far as changing oil and all those kind of things, I know how to do none of that. So I've had a great appreciation for different tasks that people, talents they have. Now, I also spent almost 30 years being in business for myself. I understand what effect policies can have on a business. I was in the financial services industry, and we did mortgages and investments and things like that. And I've seen policies come into place that would force us out of doing some of the things that we were doing, such as banking. They put it so that it was almost impossible for the company to continue to deal with banking, also with automobile insurance. And so I understand how America works from a free market capitalistic system, and I understand that system does not care who owns it. If you understand that system, you can not only become rich, you can become wealthy, because America gives you the opportunity to do two things. One is to fail or succeed. And you can actually fail your way to success, because Alexander Graham Bell is an example of that. Booker T. Washington is an example of that. Thomas Edison is an example of that, because the first time they tried it, as far as education concerned, the light bulb or either the telephone, they didn't succeed. But America offers everybody that opportunity, and we have to make sure that we keep that opportunity in place. It is one of the greatest things about America that you can think of.
I fully support that. I mean, we are a great nation. The spirit, the entrepreneurship, the ability to go out and try new avenues, the path less traveled, all those things make the difference. And that's why people want to come. People want to come to America. Their number one choice, and will always be the number one choice, because of our freedoms. Now, let's go back to the 1960 sit-in.
Okay.
Was that your first protest, peaceful protest?
Yes, it was. And I participated in a number because we put the next big one I dealt with was we put the financial services industry on trial across America, and found out, because we put them on trial because some people were being taken advantage of because they didn't understand how the financial market works, such as lending laws and people paying more for a house than they should, the wrong kind of insurance, all these kind of things, not knowing how to pay the house off early, the whole 9 yards. So that began me dealing in a number of various protests. But I've always been at the forefront of changing things. I've been put in the forefront of changing things in my life. That's how I became after I became the chairman for the Martin Luther King Commission for the state of North Carolina. I sought to make changes there because one of the things that we did not discuss there was politics. We talked about and tried to work toward things that Dr. King had lived about. And so then I took on the Frederick Douglass Foundation because we have some underserved people in this country whose voices are not heard. And I bring issues to the table that should be heard because I also sit on the Central Committee for the Republican Party for the state of North Carolina. And I understand very well what is going on in the political arena. And I understand what we need to do to change that. We've got 535 people telling 320 plus million people what they should or should not do. And our Constitution begins with we the people and not they the government. And we go back a little further, the Declaration of Independence says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they have been endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, that are among neither life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and governments have been instituted by men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And so people that serve in office are servants of the people. And somehow or another, too many of them have gotten it turned around and they don't understand that because they're putting out policies that are restricting people's freedom, have no idea the policies that they're putting out, too much central government, not enough local government. And I'll talk about that a little later on, even now with our local government as to what's transpiring here. And I don't agree with that, which we're dealing with right now.
Okay. You just mentioned your representation of the Republican Party. How long have you been with the Republican Party? Have you always been a Republican, or did you switch
No,
over?
I was a Democrat, but long I was a Republican. So I understand both sides. Now, why was I a Democrat? Because people told me that that's what I was supposed to be, a Democrat. Back in, that's why I'm so hopeful about America. Back in, I think it was 1972, after I graduated from A&T, we didn't discuss politics in my house. And for some reason, we're sitting at the table, my father and I brought up politics. And I started espousing about the Democratic Party. And I started talking about all these things that they were doing. My father was a very quiet man. He didn't say a whole lot. It was actions is what he was about. And he looks me in the eye and he says, son, you don't know your history. You don't know what the Republican Party has done for we as a people. And it took me 25 plus years before I thought enough to go and do the research, because here's what I saw. You remember what I said about my dad before with third grade education? I had great respect for him. I did debating. But I saw myself sitting there with a college degree, and he had a third grade education. And he's trying to tell me something that he doesn't know about, which he had lived and I hadn't lived. And so when I started to do my research and see what had been done by the Republican Party, as I said before, the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, all those things that they endorsed, and even to the point of new civil rights movements that were brought forth, has always come out of the Republican Party. And if you go back and research your history, businesses in America do better when the Republican Party is in than when they aren't. So I will understand both sides of the aisle. And the bottom line, excuse me, for me is that the platform for the Republican Party differentiates so much from the Democratic Party that I don't have problems with it. So when George Bush II ran for president, that's when I changed over. Now, some things that still drive me is that we have a party that endorses, their platform endorses, first they don't believe in God, according to what I saw in Charlotte a few years ago, about 8 years ago. Second thing is that they believe in abortion. I don't believe in abortion. They believe in same-sex marriage. I don't believe in same-sex marriage. My Christianity tells me not that. They are not, and they believe in big government, all these kind of things that take away people's freedom. And so there's a reason for that. The reason why I changed over to the Republican Party, and I see that they work better for the American public at large than the Democratic Party does.
I thank you for that. I I'm sure you wish you could speak with your father again today. I feel
Oh,
the same way.
yes. Oh,
To
yeah.
talk to him, and he would
Yeah.
probably say, "Son, I'm proud of you for all the things you've done, but it's like they said, when you're in your 20s, you need to be, uh, you're a Democrat because you want things for everyone, and it sounds great.
And
But
see,
by the time you're 40 and you
mm,
realize that that
mm.
stuff that's being given away to everyone is yours, you better become a
And see,
conservative or you
he
lose
was a
it.
Republican all his life. Now, here's what I've seen. Whether it was ill intention or well intentioned, it's like going north when you want to go south, leaving North Carolina and wanting to go to New York and you're going south. One of the biggest things that happened in the Black community was a great society. And it took away a lot of the opportunity that we had as a race of people. Because in order to receive a welfare check, the man that lived in the household could not be there. So the government actually became the woman's wife, a woman's husband. And depending on the government, Ronald Reagan said the 9 worst words you can hear is I'm from the government and I'm here to help. The government in general will go create a problem and find a solution that does not help the public at all. And so, as I said, I've done research on both parties, and I am very well understand which party that works best for me. And so that's why, Alan, I'm not putting a plug in for you, but I'm in great hopes that you win your race and be representative of what the Republican Party stands for, because I've seen what's happened with the Democratic Party. Right now, what you have is you go and you research all these things that are going on in America right now. Here's what you will see. A great deal of those cities that are dealing with these situations right now, who do you have in charge? Democrats. And people don't have to believe me, go and do your research. But they're blaming it on we who are Republicans when we have not been there for the most time. And so we got a program called Think Before You Vote, because elections have consequences. And in November, we all better think before we vote, because it will reflect for the next 5 years, 4 years, or whatever it is, of what we're going to look like in this country. And if I go a little further, we're dealing with a pandemic, coronavirus, COVID-19, and the governor, rightly so, put out an order that said that we should keep our distance, we should practice safety, which was good because we're dealing with something unknown. But all of a sudden, when this situation happens in Minneapolis, the governor shows himself to have forgotten about that. Now, why do I say that? Because he gets out there and marches with the protesters, takes his mask off, and does not practice safe distancing. So I call that hypocritical. We just recently had a situation whereby that they had a race in North Carolina, car race, whereby they had 2,000 people there, and the way they were able to do it is because they called it a protest. Something is wrong with that. It's ambiguity. So if they can go out there, and we have the right to protest, don't get me wrong, we have the right to protest, but if they can go out there and protest, why can't I go out there and go about my business and do what I do? And so it should be fair and equitable for all people. And this thing that we're talking about, social justice, is justice. It's either justice, it's just or unjust. It has, for me, it has nothing to do with you're black, white, or red or yellow. It's whether it's just or unjust. Because when you start to call it different kind of justices, the brush is painted too broad, and it covers too many things, and people get confused. And so we have to go back to understanding that who we are as a country. For example, a lot of people think that the Constitution gives us rights. It doesn't. It recognizes our rights. And so we have the Declaration of Independence, which is our promise, The Constitution, which is our fulfillment of that promise, which talks about your general rights, and then you have our Declaration of Independence, which talks about our individual rights, and no government, no entity, or anybody has a right to take away your unalienable rights. These are God ordained, the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So we already have things in place that we're debating over. As a matter of fact, I constantly say that there's not but one race, and that's a human race. We have melanin in us, which is different shades, and so that's already been established. We are dealing with, we go about dealing with things every day that have already been established, and we need to be moving about working together, because Dr. King said, unless we learn to live together as brothers, we'll perish together as fools. And we have to begin to work together so that we can make for a better country, not just for ourselves, but for our posterity, the people that are coming behind us, that we make America better for each generation that comes forth, because everybody in the world has been looking to America. We have all, and I hear so many people talking about how bad America is. Well, why are all these people trying to come to this country, even losing their lives? Now, they must know something that we don't know. We're taking for granted something they're willing to die for in certain cases. And so we have to go back and do some introspection and see how blessed we are, even though this is an imperfect country. And I consider myself to be one of the most blessed individuals in the world, because I am not a survivor. I am an overcomer. It's not where you start, it's where you finish. I was born on, if there was such a thing as a track where I was born on what they call a wrong side of the track, but it's not where you start, it's where you finish. And I'm not an unusual individual. I have the courage to fight for what I believe. One of the things that's wrong to ever do is tell Clarence Henderson what he cannot do. Because if it's something I want to do and it's legal, I will challenge it to the end. That's been my lot in life. And I think everybody in America should be that way, because they had an opportunity.
I think that's great. Great advice for anyone. So I thank you for that. With regard to the current state, what's going on with the protests, some of the civil unrest we had in the last week and a half, what are your thoughts on the current state of play with regard to the civil protests, and what advice do you have for the protesters as they move forward?
It's in our Constitution, the First Amendment. We have the right to peaceably assemble and give redress to our grievances to the government. But we do not have the right to riot and tear down what we should be building up. And so we have a mixture now of people going out protesting for what they see as a good cause, but then they're being mixed in with what I call infiltrators coming from excuse me, outside of the area and causing mayhem. Excuse me. We have had a number of people get killed during this time. And so the question becomes, what do we do if America continues to burn? We are a nation of laws. And how long will it be before they come, those people that are violent, before they come into my neighborhood or your neighborhood? So we've got to be able to contain this thing and make sure that the people out there protesting, they are doing it in a peaceful way, because again, if we would have committed violence, then we would not have been successful. Watts is a permanent an example of what happened there. And there's other times we've had riots. So there's a way to redress issues. If the law is not the right law, then we need to go about changing that law. Because Jim Crow is a law in the books. It's no longer in the books right now. We proved that laws can be changed that are unjust laws. Remember what I said before about we put governments in place to govern justly, and when they don't, we have a redress of voting them out of office. We have that kind of redress, and we are actually the ones that determine the fate and fortune of our elected officials, but we seem not to recognize that. So my question is, when all this is said and done, what will it have changed? We've got businesses that have been burned down. Black folks have had businesses been burned down. We've had all these things that have happened to people that were innocent bystanders. And so we need to really think about, how do we approach these things? This thing didn't happen in a vacuum. It's not going to be solved in a vacuum. It's a process that we must go through to make things better. And we need to do something like what we're doing right now. We need to have conversations about this and put the issue of race on the table, and let's really talk about it. Let's really speak on how we each think about race, not necessarily how we feel. It may be about feelings, but we need to think about what's causing us to feel that certain way. And so we have an obligation to defend our freedom, because Ronald Reagan again said we're never more than a decade away from losing our freedom. And for me, about 8 years ago, we were 8 years into losing that freedom, according to the policies they were putting out. And so right now, people look at me very strange because I have endorsed Donald Trump. They think that something's wrong with me, and I'm being called names by people that look like me that I was called when I was growing up, not to my face necessarily, but I looked at the policies. My question about Donald Trump is this: what policy has he put out that was racist? When Hillary Clinton said that if she was elected, the church was going to have to change its mind about abortion. All these things that people in this country believe in, and here comes a politician that's going to tell us how we should believe. You take, for example, the definition of marriage. So a few years ago, 66% of the voters in North Carolina said, we believe in traditional marriage. We had one judge that brought a case before him and changed the whole 9 yards. Well, what about those of us that believe in traditional marriage? We had voted for it, and yet some judge changed it. So what he was saying is that our laws, our Constitution is a living document. It isn't. So we have to begin to study to show ourselves approved to see what's best for our nation.
Sound advice, and I thank you for that, because there's got to be a change. We want to make a change. The question is how best to do it. Mm-hmm. And you being at the forefront of even the teachings and actions of Dr. Martin Luther King. I mean, you were the pioneer. You were his Sherpa. You just weren't recognized for 40 years. So we thank you for that. I mean, I mean that. There's other things going on throughout the nation. Let's talk about the state of Virginia right now, where I used to be, and still have family up there. The governor and the mayor of Richmond are starting to make overtures to remove several of the main Confederate monuments from the city's Monument Avenue. How do you feel about the removal of some of the Civil War statues, the monuments?
Are we going to remove our entire history? Those statues and monuments represent things that have happened in this country, which are very, very valuable to know about. Those statues, I'm not concerned about those statues. I'm concerned about the people that are alive. And it teaches us about things that have happened in this country, whether it's good or bad or ugly. If you don't know, if you're a citizen of these United States, and you don't know the history of this country, at least some part of it, how do you know the idea about what America is? How do you know whether or not you actually see yourself as wanting to be a citizen of these United States? Those things, without those things, how would we know about slavery if they're going to take all of it out of the books? How will we know about what's next if they take down Dr. King's statue? How will we know about what he did? If they take down Abraham Lincoln's statue, how will we know what he did as the 16th president? So these are history things that are not historical things that are not necessarily being taught in our books. So I would say to the government that you're totally wrong to change, to remove those statutes because they represent America, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we have to deal with and look at what has happened in this country. And it shows us the growth pattern that we've had during that time from then to now, how much we've changed. For example, we had a battle between the North and the South. That's a part of what that is. That the Confederacy was real. The Union was real. All these things. We fought a war, and it was about, it might have been about more than that, but to free the slaves. What other country in history, there may be one, I'm not sure, that has fought to do that. And so that's a rich history that we need to understand so that people will begin to appreciate this country called America, because we have freedom like no other. I didn't have to ask permission for you to get on and talk with you today. I can go and assemble wherever I want. I can do all kinds of things. I don't have to ask permission. And so when you think about these other countries where they have to have meetings in secret and all those kind of things. I may not agree with what another person says, but I will defend to my death the right for them to say it. So right now we are dealing with want to take away freedom of speech. We've gone from dealing with the black-white issue. Now it's about ideology, attacking people's character. Where if I don't agree with what you say, I'll try to shut you down. I don't want to hear you talking about it. And no matter what you say, it's not right. That's not what America's all about. Thomas Jefferson said, we are America is an idea in the minds of men, people. My question is to each and every person that's listening, anybody else, what is your idea about America? Because it's so important as to whether or not you are the problem or you are the solution. We're either one or the other. And what will be said about each one of us between our dash, our date of birth and our date of death. We've had some that have torn down and some that have built up. And thank God for those that have built up, because I stand on the shoulders of some of the slaves that fought for freedom back during that time. Who is standing on our shoulders today that we can look back on and say we made America a better country when we were living than it was before? That's what we owe to ourselves and what we owe to America and we owe to our families.
Again, thank you. As they say, a nation that fails to learn from its past, its history, is doomed to repeat it. And taking down those statues sets us on that type of a course. I really appreciate this, but we wanted to just ask you one final question, and this came in. If you could give one message tonight to unify the divide that our nation has faced in the past few weeks, what would that message be?
That message would be is that we learn to work together again. And the battles that we have fought, our armed forces have fought, have proven that point. Because we've had black, white, fighting together to defend our freedom. But yet we come back when it's peacetime and we act like now we become at war with each other. How else could we have won the battles that we have fought had we not done it together? My oldest brother was in the Korean conflict, almost lost his life, and dealt with segregation in this country before that I did, because he was 11 years older than I was, but yet he went to Korea and fought for the country, came back and dealt with issues here, became a policeman, working together to defend the public at large to keep them safe. And so the answer is for us to learn how to work together, work out our differences, and we have a difference that we can't work out, then we leave it alone. We have to, all you can do is all you can do. And it's better to sit down and have a conversation and negotiate rather than trying to tear down something and then have to go back and try to rebuild it. So we're able to have better relationships because I know more about Alan Swan now than I did before today. I knew about you before, but I've had a chance to be with you twice today, and now I understand Alan Swain a little bit better. That's what we have to do, is that we become strangers, or we're strangers, and then we need to get to know each other so that we know how each other are. And the biggest mistake we can make is that we keep looking on the outside when we should be looking on the inside. It's not what you look like on the outside, it's who you are on the inside. So America is dealing with a heart problem. There's no law that can be put in place that will change the hearts of some people. But some things can be put in place to be preventative, because if tomorrow, before this day is over, unfortunately, somebody's going to go kill somebody. Somebody's going to rob somebody. We're going to do all these kinds of things because that's the nature of fallen human beings. And so how do we live with that kind of situation? Most of the people in America are good people, law-abiding citizens, work hard every day, and all they want to be is left alone. And when we see somebody whose behavior is putting other people in danger, then the justice system, we have to have them step in and deal with it. Because see, Alan, my rights end where yours begin. And if we understand that we both have rights, and I should not infringe upon your rights and you should not infringe upon mine, we should have more discussions than we're having right now.
Well, Clarence, that's a great way to end this session. I want to thank you personally. As we've gotten to know each other a lot better, I look forward to being able to work with you as we fight for everyone's freedom and their rights, their right to peaceful protest, to make a difference, freedom to assembly. All the things you brought up tonight have been invaluable. So I'm hoping that not only will this be available on our websites, yours and mine, but also to the people here, that they get a chance to view this video since we're recording at this town hall, so we can help spread the word, not only about your heroics when you were a young man at North Carolina A&T back in 1960, but that the things you're trying to do for this great country. I know your parents are proud, okay? You may say your father may have had a third grade education, but he's looking down now and he's smiling, saying, I did right and I raised a great son, just like he had two other sons. But what I'm saying is he had such intellect and wisdom for someone that did not have the school education. Mm-hmm. He was that special, man. I think you feel that way about your mother, too.
Oh, sure. I certainly do.
But thank you very much. I look forward to it.
You're quite welcome. You're quite welcome.
I guess I would say that these kinds of sessions, I am Alan Swain, and I am running for Congressional District 2 for the state of North Carolina. We try and have these hard-hitting type of sessions with people like Mr. Henderson here, who is a civil rights icon, has made the difference for our nation, but yet at 78, he's still fighting for what he believes in, and what he wants to do is be fair and equitable to everyone, and dialogue is probably the most important thing we can do. We have other upcoming town halls. We'll have more with Clarence, I'm sure, in the future, with some panels like he's been participating in for the last few weeks. On this Thursday, we actually have the Wake County GOP is hosting, along with Swain for Congress and the Trump victory for vets of North Carolina, showcasing 7 panelists who are former veterans like myself, to expose them to anyone that wants to listen and hear about these people. Great Americans, and now they've been asked to serve a second time. They were just like Clarence and myself. They were citizen soldiers, and now we're being asked to be citizen statesmen. Clarence may not be running for office, but he's running to win our hearts. Okay, so Amen. I guess that's probably the most important thing. So Amen. I thank you all for this, and Clarence, Godspeed, and look forward to working with you as we move forward with the campaigns and your help for the Republican Party. Well, thank you very much.
Alan, I thank you for having me, and God bless you. Have a great evening.
You too. You have a nice evening.
Okay,
Take
you
care.
too.
Thank you.
Okay, bye now.
Bye-bye.